And so we've come finally to the end of the two great figures, Pompey the Great and Caesar, two of the three table legs, so to speak, of the first triumvirate. It's important to understand that although the deaths of both of these figures in respectively 48 and 44 BC was historic in their ramifications, these in fact were simply small steps in a much longer and quite complex process of the death of the Roman Republic. We're almost there, in fact, and within a couple of videos we are going to see the Roman Republic transition finally into the Roman Empire. But of course we do have a few steps to go. So in this video we're going to finally get down to the infamous year 44 BC with Beware the Ides of March. But prior to that, I want to step aside from Caesar for a moment and talk about a particularly disturbing incident that happened in 53 and 52 BC related to the general chaos that was gradually bringing the Republic down. We have this figure Clodius, whose full name was Publius Claudius Pulcher, and Claudius was spelled Claudius, similar to the later Claudius, the emperor. However, in order to distinguish members of different gentes, here the spelling is given as Clodius, Clodius. Now, Clodius was a rather unusual and very capricious fellow. He, in fact, had a rather bad history of breaking into mystery cults, especially one called Bona Dea, or Good Goddess, literally. And so he had a rather checkered past. And he also had a sister named Clodia, and rumors were afloat that there was a rather inappropriate relationship between them. Now, Clodius was from a patrician family. The Claudian family itself was patrician, and he was a senator. However, around the same time that the triumvirate was going on, near the beginning of it, Clodius attempted to revoke his patrician status, and in order to serve as tribune of the plebs, because he became increasingly interested in the interests of the plebs. Tribunes, however, could not be patricians. And so Clodius tried to get around that by getting himself adopted into a plebeian family. This was in fact illegal by the long-standing traditions, probably going all the way back to Romulus. That was one of the whole points about patrician families, not to permit interacting among families between patricians and plebeians. So that put Clodius in a rather bad light. However, he did pull this off, and he did, in fact, eventually become tribune and passed quite a few bits of legislation related to public dole and such. However, what brought Clodius into the limelight most forcefully was that he had a major feud with Marcus Tullius Cicero. Cicero, the orator, was responsible for, as we talked about in a previous video, bringing down the conspiracy of Catiline in 63 and 62 BC. At that time, Cicero was supported by the Senatus Consultum Ultimum that gave him dictatorial powers to see to it that the Republic would come to no harm. And so Cicero had executed members of the Catilinean conspiracy. Clodius objected and passed a law saying that that was illegal and got Cicero exiled. The year after Clodius was tribune, 58 BC, when he did this, 57 BC, this opponent, Titus Annius Milo, became tribune, and Milo tried to undo Clodius's efforts by getting Cicero recalled from exile. This is what put these two, Clodius and Milo, onto a collision course. Cicero, incidentally, was eventually recalled from exile, but not before Clodius arranged to confiscate three of his major estates and had one of them completely destroyed. Now, the two of them faced off for consul in 53 BC, and both of them had thugs forming gangs. And this is, in fact, one of the most distressing cases of gang violence breaking out in the streets of Rome. In 53 BC, with Clodius now no longer a tribune, and Milo himself also not a tribune, but both of them having sort of indirect support from the plebs at one time or another, both of them were attempting to run, and the Senate was attempting to regulate the election. However, tribunician power with the veto came in and interfered, was used to interfere with the electoral process. In the end, because of that, the two thugs resorted to violence. The following year, 52 BC, the violence finally broke out excessively, and Clodius ended up being murdered. Milo was charged with the murder. He was put on trial. He was supposed to be defended by a man named Marcellus, and then alternately the closing speech at his trial was supposed to be given by Cicero, but both of them were intimidated by the supporters of Clodius, who demonstrated violently at the trial, and in the end Milo was executed. This breakdown of civic order is essentially what very likely led to some of the reconnections between the Senate and Pompey the Great, especially because Milo had been a very active supporter of Pompey the Great, and it's possible that that was one of the indirect factors leading to the eventual breakdown of relations between Pompey and Caesar. So from there we now turn to Caesar himself. 49 BC. Caesar was in Gaul, having completed his brilliant campaign from 59 to 51 BC of conquering Gaul, and he wanted to return in 49 BC to stand for the consulship. But in order to do that, Caesar was going to have to disband his army, and he tried to appeal to the Senate to receive leniency on that rule. However, Pompey prevented that from happening. Pompey and the Senate by that point had joined, and the two groups together made sure that Caesar was blocked from coming into Italy and Rome itself with a standing army. Caesar, at this point, crossed the Rubicon River and in the north part of Italy, and in doing so declared civil war on Pompey and the Senate, essentially by breaking the rule of order. Pompey ended up being defeated by Caesar's forces in Italy and fled to Greece. At that point, Caesar made a reconnection with the Senate, got an SCU passed. Caesar became dictator, and he chased after Pompey and his forces in Greece. And finally, in 48 BC, Caesar's forces caught up with Pompey's forces. There was a pitched battle, and Caesar defeated Pompey. Pompey fled to Egypt, and it's likely that Pompey and Caesar both were among the numerous suitors for the Egyptian pharaoh Cleopatra, well known, of course, for her later relationship with Mark Antony. Pompey arrived at the shores of Egypt and was assassinated, according to the biographical write-up of him by Plutarch. Caesar came after him and finally came across his dead body and gave Pompey a burial. Caesar at this point now had the position of dictator. He should have relinquished the powers, but once again, as Pompey before him and also as Sulla before him, Caesar ended up never relinquishing the powers, and he took on, once again, as Sulla had done, the perpetual dictator position. From 48 to 44 BC, Caesar engaged in several military campaigns, and finally in 44 BC, he started making ambitious plans to return to the eastern province Parthia in order to rescue the lost standards from the disaster that happened in 52 BC with Crassus. It was the fact that Caesar was going to be away for so long and that he had this complete power to just decide when he was going to go someplace and where, that ultimately led to the conspiracy by the senators on the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC, to lure Caesar into the Senate and then begin to propose legislation for him to consider. And in the midst of the discussions that were happening, one of the senators snuck up behind him and stabbed him. And Caesar was brought down in 44 BC. Not surprisingly, Caesar's assassination led to an immediate rupture in the Roman Republic itself, and much of what follows with the emperor to come, Octavian, and Caesar's lieutenant Mark Antony defines the remaining final embers of the Roman Republic, as we will talk about in the next historical video. Very good. We will see you next video.